The Empress of the Eastern Empire had a problem. Rashta, her husband's official mistress, had been following her around. She was known to wander around the castle, but they had been bumping into each other around lately. While working on her official party planning duties, Navier asked Rashta about it directly and told her not to deny something so obvious. Rashta admitted that it was because Duke Ergi commented that Navier was the model empress and she wanted to learn about etiquette from her. I call BS on this explanation because Rashta had been copying Navier even before Duke Ergi arrived in the kingdom. Although, she did bring up some good points. As someone who didn't grow up amongst the nobility, Rashta had a lot to learn about this new world Subversion introduced her to. Rashta was trying to fix it by taking etiquette lessons from Baron Lante. Still, Rashta believes that she could learn more by following around Empress Navier, similar to how a small child would copy an older kid. Rashta didn't believe that Navier would take the time to teach her, so she decided to do the infinitely creepier thing by following her around. I kinda get it. Navier is someone she admires, and as the old adage goes, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. Navier, on the other hand, was having none of it. By this time, Navier had already tried multiple times to keep her distance and draw boundaries between herself and Rashta. When Rashta insisted on calling Navier her sister, Navier told her that she could be sisters with Subversion's next mistress. Rashta ran crying to Subversion after that remark. Navier agreed not to befriend Duke Ergi, a dignitary from a foreign country, because Rashta requested it. In return, Navier told Rashta to not take anything that was hers. So far, Navier had taken every opportunity to clearly and firmly create boundaries between herself and Rashta, even if it resulted in her husband criticizing her. Speaking of Subversion, even he knew better than to let Rashta join Navier's birthday celebration away from the palace. Surprisingly, when Rashta confessed that she wanted to be more like the Empress, Navier did the infinitely kinder and classier thing by discouraging the mistress from copying her, as her husband loves her just the way she is. Even though Rashta is a fugitive who is pregnant with her husband's child, she is still one of her subjects. As Empress of the Eastern Empire, Navier's priority is the empire and its people. Petty jealousies over her husband are secondary when she has the empire's overall well-being to think about. She could not be drawn into a public catfight with Rashta, who suddenly wore a dress similar to hers during the New Year celebration instead of her usual pastel empire waist dresses. Thankfully, Subversion lied and said that he was the one who requested Navier to wear a red ball gown. By doing so, Subversion squashed the speculation that anything was wrong in his household. The monarchs can't have rumors spread that the Empress was bullying the poor mistress with a commoner background. This might be a silly little game for Rashta, but Navier represents the Eastern Empire. How she is perceived is how the imperial family is perceived. As Empress of the Eastern Empire, Navier had to appear above reproach. She can't be seen as a cowardly and jealous woman who couldn't confront her husband, so she takes her anger out on the poor mistress. She can't display what others might consider an inappropriate amount of anger towards her husband, then she will be criticized as incapable of controlling her emotions. If she just crushed down her emotions and pretended that nothing was wrong, then she was foolish and idiotic. The glory of womanhood. While the role of Empress emotionally confines Navier, she is unafraid to express what I will describe as her monstrous dislike of Rashta's baby. Every time Subversion brings up Rashta's baby as a topic of conversation, Navier makes it clear that Rashta's pregnancy is not a happy news for her. This surprised Subversion, who didn't think Navier could be so cold, heartless, and self-centered towards an innocent child. More arguments between Navier and Subversion erupted when he requested Navier to host a banquet for his first child with Rashta. Yes, you heard me right. After learning that his wife is not happy about the baby, Subversion requested her to plan a party celebrating his mistress's pregnancy. What gave him such an idea? Well, in his mind, the child might as well be Navier's. Navier and Subversion have been married for a long time and they still hadn't produced a child and heir to the throne. While they still might have a child in the future, there's also the possibility that they won't, and Subversion will be put in a position to name his firstborn with Rashta as heir. Navier doesn't like that idea, as she believes that the child's mere existence threatened her, no matter how good-natured the child would grow up to be. After all, in their world, it's not uncommon for a favored illegitimate child to become a threat to the legitimate successor. To Navier, the innocent child in Rashta's belly is a problem, and it would be dishonest to pretend that it's not. Therefore, she would not take on that emotional burden. Not when she was already hosting foreign dignitaries from neighboring kingdoms, and not when her doting yet hot-headed brother Corsair was due to arrive in the capital, and she had to worry about making sure he wouldn't explode on her husband. You could just imagine how enraged he was that Navier was tasked with planning Rashta's pregnancy banquet / baby shower ball, and that's what I'm gonna call it. Navier tried to placate her brother by saying that planning the party was not a big deal, but anybody who cares about her is mad on her behalf. Even her ladies-in-waiting are hesitant to give Rashta a good baby shower gift, but Navier needed to keep up appearances, so of course she attended the party. When Navier entered the ballroom, Rashta was happy to see the Empress join the party, even though she was an hour late. Her face practically burst with joy when Navier finally gave her a gift, and this time, it's in person. Now she knows for sure that the present is from the Empress, and not just some things the Empress sent to her under the Empress's name. I think Rashta will be happy to receive a pair of socks from Navier, but instead, she received a bejeweled knife that she gushed over. In her excitement that she's finally getting along with the Empress, Rashta asked for Navier to bless her child, which empresses regularly do for pregnant women of the empire. Well, Navier initially declined. Her husband, the emperor, insists that she do it, and Navier relented just to avoid an argument in front of everybody. Navier blessed Rashta's child and wished that the child would live a life like the sword she gave, and to her, that meant an extravagant and beautiful life. Rashta was initially excited about Navier's blessing, taking it as another sign that things were heading in the right direction. The nobles who mocked her for her status as a former slave were now trying to get into her good graces by sending her gifts. Even the Empress sent her a gift, which showed that the Empress would fall in love with her child once she gave birth. It's inevitable. After all, who doesn't like babies? Then, things turned out for the worse thanks to Duke Ergi. He had a different interpretation of the gift. He pointed out that while the jewel-encrusted sword was expensive, it was useless for battle and only good for decoration. He told Rashta that the Empress meant that she wished the baby would lead a vain and empty life without any responsibility. Essentially, the life that Rashta has been living ever since she entered the palace. On face value, there was nothing wrong with what Navier wished. As an adult, I would personally hate feeling useless and aimless. However, what more can you want for a child that's in its mother's womb? Even Duke Ergi said that a life like that could be its own kind of blessing once he convinced Rashta that the Empress insulted her and the people at her party were making fun of her. Rashta's mood quickly shifted from smug happiness to self-pity. Based on nothing but what she assumed how others saw her, she started tearing up over her perceived rejection. Without caring if others saw her, she started complaining to Subversion about how the Empress mistreated her by insulting her in front of everybody. She catastrophizes even further by openly worrying how the Empress will treat the little prince or princess, which alarmed everybody around her. Subversion had to quickly take her away from the party and explain to Rashta that her children could never be a prince or a princess, even if he was the father. Rashta couldn't understand what Subversion was saying. To her, it seemed unfair that her children with the emperor wouldn't receive those titles while the empress's children would. She even encouraged Subversion to change the law, which Subversion quickly dismissed because those succession laws were under the temple's purview, so Subversion has no power over it. This raised questions about how well someone like Rashta understood the system of government that she lived under. I don't know the laws or values of the empire, but I'm just an outside observer who does not live in a society where nobility, royalty, mistresses, and slaves are the norm. I don't know what privileges came with the title official mistress and why this system exists in their empire. However, I know enough to point out that the concept of fairness is such an odd value to apply when talking about titles in a monarchy. Subversion tried to hint that her child might get a title if the Empress adopted the baby, but that was an idea that Rashta didn't even entertain, which I wouldn't knock her for. Subversion tried to assure Rashta that her child will be taken care of and that her children will receive more privileges than most people in the Empire, more privileges than she ever dreamed of, but Rashta was too fixated on what her children wouldn't have. She then went on this weird tangent where she cried over how her child would be jealous for a younger half-sibling because the Empress' child would have a better claim to the throne. All things Navier was worried about even before Rashta got pregnant. I think this says a lot about how immature and narrow Rashta's worldview was and how she doesn't think this through. To her, what mattered was that her children were treated unfairly, which again, I find to be a funny thing to advocate for in a monarchy. She doesn't think about how her temper tantrum would make other people nervous about the possibility of a war over the throne in the future. The next day, Rashta decided to confront Navier by waiting in a hallway for her. Rashta told Navier that other people enlightened her that the sword she gave had an awful meaning behind it, which Navier easily dismissed as the meaning is awful if the interpreter was greedy. Rashta insisted that the meaning was offensive and that Navier offended her in front of a lot of people. This reminds me of when I was in high school and I would pack my schedule to the brim with extracurricular activities. At one point, I was sleeping 2 hours a day and I was not about to let anybody tell me to slow down, but the thing is, that was what I was doing to myself. Rashta's child hasn't been born yet. Rashta then shifted gears and said that even though Navier insulted her, she would turn the other cheek because she was the woman the emperor loved, and so she will be taking the high road. Saying a line like that is not actually about keeping the peace and taking the high road. It's about ego. Navier didn't help the situation by engaging with Rashta's babblings. Navier commented that Rashta must have thought highly of herself, and Rashta replied that of course she thought highly of herself. She's the woman His Majesty loves. It's not the best thing to say to the guy's wife. Then Navier said the line that I might need to write a whole different video about. A line so simple but explains so much about the women in the series. Navier asked, "Are you saying you only have value while you're loved by the emperor?" As a modern woman, I thought it was such a powerful and kind thing for Navier to say that, and that Rashta unnecessarily took offense to it. I initially thought that Navier wanted Rashta to realize that she shouldn't tie her self-worth to someone else's fleeting emotions. However, after I thought about it some more, I realized that Navier hit a nerve because that's the truth for Rashta's situation, and this is the case for Navier's as well. The only reason Rashta was allowed to be in the presence of the Empress of the Eastern Empire was because the Emperor favored her. In their world, both Rashta and Navier's rank in society, as well as their identities, are tied to their relationship with the Emperor. I might explore this idea further in a different video if I found the time with my busy schedule, but tell me if you will be interested. We'll see. Rashta, on the other hand, in her infinite immaturity, tried to salvage her ego again by saying that she would ignore what Navier just said for the sake of the children. When pressed further, Rashta said that Subversion deemed her as likely infertile and that Navier would likely be the adoptive mother to the children she gave birth to. This provoked Navier's hot-headed brother Corsair to lunge at her. Navier tried to pull Corsair back, but Rashta fell to the ground, clutching her stomach. Corsair immediately asserted that Rashta was pretending, and I initially thought she was. Though there is a clear image of Corsair lunging at Rashta, Corsair's insistence that Rashta was just making a big deal out of nothing made me believe him. Attendants quickly gathered around Rashta, and we were told that it was important for Rashta to take care of herself because she's in her first trimester. To avoid any further problems, Subversion wisely advised Rashta to watch what she said around Corsair. However, Rashta was indignant at the suggestion that she was at fault in any way, viewing herself as completely innocent. When Subversion pointed out that other people heard her call the Empress infertile, which she did, Rashta shifted the blame by saying that Navier called her worthless, which she didn't. Kinda. Look, Corsair shouldn't have lunged at her, but it's obvious that Rashta wanted to initiate a confrontation whether she realized it or not. From the moment she decided to wait for Navier in the hallway, to every tactless word that came out of her mouth, Rashta chose to stir things up, which she already has a history of doing. I don't know what Rashta expected to happen when she decided to confront Navier, but it's clear that she didn't think this through. I understand the desire to stand up for yourself by telling off someone who disrespected you, especially considering that Rashta has been nothing but friendly towards Navier before Navier insulted her. However, Rashta should learn that at times, it's best to keep quiet, protect yourself, and hope that karma works its magic. By telling her to stay away from the Corsair, Subversion was giving Rashta very sound advice so she could protect herself. However, all Rashta could hear was that it was all her fault and her ego couldn't handle that small of a pushback. She was too scared that Subversion would think that she's an awful person and start hating her, and that her shaky position as an emperor's mistress would be taken away from her. We know from previous chapters that Viscount Lutetia warned her she could be cast out and become a slave once more if the emperor ever grows tired of her. Unlike Navier, Rashta doesn't have a supportive family in the nobility that she could turn to, so what would happen to her? And what about her child? Would they take her child away from her? And how could someone like her fight a custody battle against the emperor? This is what we call catastrophizing. I'm not qualified to talk about mental health in a public forum, but it's clear to me that Rashta is very insecure and she might even be unwell, or at least she's letting her fear and worry about the worst possible scenario control her. Instead of just trying to avoid Navier's brother like Subversion suggested, Rashta shifted the blame and unintentionally had him banned from the castle. The emperor could not and should not think badly of her. She insisted that she never called Navier infertile, which she did, and even if her words were misconstrued that way, she was pregnant with the emperor's child, and Corsair shouldn't have shoved her, Which yeah, he shouldn't have. Even though Soveshu didn't fully believe Rashta's account, he banned Corsair from the castle just to be safe. Corsair was not happy with his punishment, but his favorite sister tried to convince him to be careful around the smart mistress. She relayed to him that Navier dug up an old rumor that contributed to the divorce of Duke and Duchess Tonia. She had shown aptitude in manipulating the upper class, with the help of Duke Ergi. There's no need to clash with her if it could be avoided. I don't know, Navier. There are people in this world who need drama in their lives. Corsair went out on the town afterwards to drink away his frustration with his friend Marquis Falon. During their drinking session, he repeated his claim that he did not hurt Rashta, which to be perfectly clear, he did. Corsair's ire about his punishment morphed into assuming that Rashta would go after Navier if she ever gave birth, so he had to protect his sister before that happened in the future. Preemptively, of course. What did I just say about people who needs drama? While Corsair couldn't enter the palace, his money, his influence, and his friend could. Though his friend initially protested getting involved, he did divulge to Corsair that during a party, rumors swirled that Rashta used to be a slave for a minor noble by the name of Viscount Loteshu. Corsair decided to investigate that incident further, even handing his friend some jewels in exchange. In addition to that, he requested his friend to do something that was not elaborated on until we heard from Navier's ladies-in-waiting that Rashta has been poisoned with a drug. This drug weakened the baby and left Rashta bedridden, but the two of them will survive. Nonetheless, the issue was taken seriously, and Rashta's servants were replaced as a precaution. Though Navier was outwardly concerned about Rashta and the baby's safety, internally, she was worried that the perpetrator was someone connected to her, and that Soveshu would blame her for it. And she was correct. Soveshu traced the purchase of the drug to Corsair's friend Marquis Falon, and from there, he assumed that Corsair and Navier had a hand on it. Soveshu made the assumption that Navier signaled her distress to her hot-headed brother and riled him up. After all, Navier is a smart woman. However, the audience knows that Navier asked her brother to keep his cool, which is the opposite of what Soveshu assumed. Maybe telling Corsair about the Tonia divorce is what riled him up, but I think it's noteworthy that Soveshu couldn't imagine a scenario where someone as hot-headed as Corsair would act on his own accord for his sister's benefit. Navier was unhappy with what Marquis Falon and Corsair did to Rashta, and she was ready to face the punishment for their actions. Thankfully, Soveshu just told Navier that he would keep the perpetrator's identity a secret to protect her, but he also made it clear that he would prioritize his child over his wife, as he should. Soveshu even hid the perpetrator's identity from Rashta. Instead, he threw her a party to make her feel better after her condition improved. But a party is a poor distraction from a life-threatening ordeal. It didn't help that Viscount Loteshu's children, including her former lover and the father of her child, attended the party. Their presence was a reminder that Viscount Loteshu was already blackmailing her about her first child with Alan before Corsair decided to threaten her pregnancy. However, her ex's presence did allow her to tell him off in his face, which felt amazing. Rashta sought out the only person she could tell everything to, Duke Ergi. He assured her that Viscount Loteshu would prevent Alan and his bratty sister Lebetty from revealing to others her past as a slave. He listened to Rashta's fear that somebody would try to hurt her again. He even proposed 2 ways for her to protect herself. The first was to ask the Emperor for his help and let him take care of her. This is the method that Rashta has been using since she met the Emperor, which didn't sufficiently protect her from getting poisoned. Affection for the Emperor is one thing. Relying on him to ensure that she and her baby were safe is another. As you can tell, Duke Ergi was not exactly selling this idea. As an aside, I want to emphasize that Rashta's concern is completely valid. I've been reading and rereading the series multiple times to make this video essay, and I've been taking notes each time somebody harmed Rashta, and it's more often than I initially realized. When Rashta first met Navier, one of Navier's ladies-in-waiting slapped her hand away. Soveshu overreacted by locking up the poor girl in the tower. Other perpetrators, namely the man, will get off much more lightly. When Viscount Landres stabbed Rashta earlier in the series, we were told of what happened through third parties, and we were given one panel of the event after it occurred. The series then dedicates a few chapters to following Navier, the protagonist of the series, as she negotiates to free the man who stabbed Rashta. There's Corsair, who lunged at Rashta the very first time the two of them crossed paths, and was let off so lightly that he was able to make plans to poison her and threaten her pregnancy. On both occasions, the series dismissed these lords' violence against Rashta in favor of dedicating more time, more panels, and more cyber ink to sympathize with the perpetrator who gravely harmed the former slave. So you could see why Rashta wouldn't be satisfied with just sitting back and letting the Emperor take care of things. Unsurprisingly, Rashta was more interested in Duke Ergi's second way she could protect herself, which turned out to be to get rid of anybody who might attack her before they strike. Rashta pushed back a bit, asking if she could get rid of an enemy that is of higher social standing, has more power, and has a lot more money. Duke Ergi immediately knew that she was talking about the Empress, and Rashta confessed that she initially wanted to be friends with the Empress. However, after everything that happened, Navier now scares her. I think this marks the point of no return, as Rashta makes it clear that she blames Navier for the threats on her life. As I noted in my previous video, the series has directly compared the two women through its art. I'm not a big fan of making women compete with each other, especially over a man, as I find it sexist, limiting, and at times frustratingly unnecessary. For one thing, Rashta and Navier are two female characters with completely different backgrounds, and there's no equitable rubric to compare the two. In a perfect world, Navier will work as an empress, and Rashta would heal from her past without worrying about somebody blackmailing her. However, we've gotten to the point where their love rivalry becomes a matter of survival for Rashta. Sometimes I wonder if Navier should have been more welcoming and friendly towards Rashta, particularly when they first met. Could Rashta help the upper class understand the struggles of those not in their social circles? But then I think about how Rashta is very much eager to obscure and deny her past, and it's annoying to talk to someone who you know can't be honest about their background. On top of that, even though Rashta constantly says she wants to get along with Navier, Rashta has done nothing to develop a friendship with the Empress. She always approached Navier with the expectation that Navier would act kindly towards her, and they would automatically become best friends. She doesn't try to get to know Navier. She doesn't bother to take an interest in things Navier might be interested in. She doesn't pick up any hobbies Navier might be interested in, so the two of them could have something to talk about. Then I realized, Rashta doesn't have any hobbies. This is just suspicion on my part, but I don't believe that Rashta was allowed to explore different interests when she was younger, as she was expected to work. This might explain why her initial conversation with Navier seemed so off and stilted. It could also explain why she always approached Navier expecting that Navier would automatically welcome her with open arms. Even so, Rashta was no longer expected to work, and she filled her time pursuing friendship based on questionable foundations.